Yes, I can, David. Just a minute.
Building a better Bay Area for a safe and secure future. This is ABC 7 News.
I'm Kristen Z. Welcome to our daily program called Getting Answers. We're asking experts your question every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Coming up, my conversation with California Congressman and House Democrats impeachment manager Adam Schiff. His reaction to John Bolton's new book, The Room Where It Happened. But first, you might have seen this already, a local topic getting national attention. San Francisco officials removed the Christopher Columbus statue at Coy Tower this morning. There had been a protest advertised on social media urging people to gather there tomorrow on Juneteenth to remove it. And the city took this step proactively. It had been there since 1957. So joining us to talk about it is Christine Pelosi, San Franciscan, Italian-American, California Democratic Women's Chair, and daughter of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Did I miss anything there, Christine? Good to see you.
Nice to see you, and good to be with everybody.
Thank you. I like the backdrop there. Hey, as an Italian-American who grew up with that statue, always having been there in that spot in Coy Tower, what's your reaction today?
Well, I think it's a sign of the times and the growing grassroots pressure there has been all over the country, really for years, to say, let's have a reckoning with our past, and let's also dedicate public spaces to people who were about healing, truth, and reconciliation rather than division. And I think the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis PD for those 8 minutes that we all saw really just galvanized and gave fresh energy to what was really happening in the Indigenous peoples movement and the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for Black and Brown lives. And frankly, as the co-chair of the Democratic National Committee Veterans and Military Families Council, I've been very active in the past 2 weeks on the effort to remove the Confederate names from bases and other military assets that we have in this country, because I think it's time that we use this as a moment of national truth, reconciliation, and healing. And one way to do that is to remove some of these vestiges of oppression and really start to have a dialogue about what we want in our education, in our history books, and in our living spaces instead.
And the military families that you work with, what do they tell you in terms of why it's meaningful to remove those statues?
Well, it's very interesting to hear, especially from African-American veterans who said, one of whom said he was a teacher at one of the bases in Texas, and he actually had to stay in the Robert E. Lee barracks. And he at first was like, I mean, are they hazing me? What is this? Right? And a lot of people felt that while they were serving, they couldn't really speak out. But now that they are out, groups like Vote Vets are helping them, find their voice to say, look, we can do something better. There are so many war heroes in this country. There are so many civic leaders and spiritual leaders in this country. We have a lot of choices. We don't have to go with people who literally took up arms against the United States of America by being active members, willing members of the Confederacy.
I want to come back to the San Francisco Columbus statue in a little bit, but what you were just saying about the removal of the Confederate symbols at the Capitol today in D.C., your mom, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, ordered the removal of several portraits of former House Speakers who had that Confederate history. Talk about why that's so important for it to happen in the nation's capital.
Well, the nation's capital is the people's house. And when you think of the places of honor that we bestow to people who have been either representatives of states, voted on by their states to be immortalized in bronze at the Capitol, or in this case, portraits of the Speaker. Here they found, when they were doing an inventory of the statues, that when it came to the portraits, that 4 United States House of Representatives speakers had been willing participants, willing active members of the Confederacy against the Union. And it was so powerful today on the eve of Juneteenth to think of these 4 speakers, these 4 members of the Confederacy. They couldn't have fathomed freedom for slaves or equality for women. And here they had a woman speaker order their removal in a process overseen by a Black female clerk of the House of Representatives. That's history, that's progress, and it's a new day.
Yeah, a year ago, I had a chance to go to D.C., and I was in that Capitol Rotunda where I learned for the first time that each state got 2 statues that they wanted displayed there. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because you would know better, I think ours was Ronald Reagan and Junipero Serra. And Serra himself is a pretty controversial figure, of course. Many people talk about what his impact was on Native Americans and the people who were already here in California. What do you think about that one and other statues that may also be hurtful symbols to some people?
Well, I think it's, I was at the Capitol for the lying in state of Elijah Cummings, the African-American congressman from Maryland, from Baltimore, Maryland, my mother's brother in service after he passed. And one of the most beautiful things was when Elijah was lying in state at the Rotunda, he was literally under the outstretched arm of a statue of Chief Standing Bear from the state of Nebraska. It was a beautiful thing. And really, I thought appropriate. I think, look, I chair the Women's Caucus of the California Democratic Party. I'm always for having more statues of women. So I was pleased when my mother was Speaker the first time and Nancy Pelosi ordered the statue of Rosa Parks to be in the Rotunda and moved the statue of Robert E. Lee down to the crypt, and also put in markers for Sojourner Truth, for early abolitionists, and also a cornerstone of the Capitol that was dedicated to the slaves who built the Capitol. So I think there's always an opportunity to have more diversity, to have more people who reflect, who are reflections of the state and all the people of the state. And this is the kind of, I hope we can have this kind of dialogue, thoughtful dialogue, not only who to put representing California, but also within the public spaces of San Francisco and in California to say, what do we want to do with those public spaces? What do we want our children to know about our history? And again, for me, growing up Italian, it was always Columbus Day, right? And then by the time I was in law school, and it was the 500th anniversary of 1492, we were celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. So we had already, kind of made that shift. It took a while for, it's taken a while for some of the laws to catch up. But I think it's really important for us to know our history, honor our history. And when we named our daughter Isabella, I was quite clear that we were naming her after the Portuguese saint, a patron saint of homeless, hungry, and orphans, as opposed to the conquistadora.
Yes,
Isabella.
yes, the queen served by Columbus. I should say that Columbus was serving. So who do you think should replace that Columbus statue? Do you have any thoughts? Should it be a person of color, perhaps an LGBTQ representative, someone Native American? What do you think would represent our city?
I think that that's a conversation our city should have. We should have roundtable discussions and bring people in, have a broad-based discussion. We're saying the same thing with the Confederate names, by the way, when they say we want to have a study. We're like, great, take off the racist name now and then have a study about who to put, whose name to put on the base, whose name to put on the barracks. So I think that has to be a community-wide discussion. I think it has to be done with great sensitivity, understanding that our diversity is our strength, as Speaker Pelosi always tells us. So we have to, I think, accept and leave space for the fact that each of us is proud of our own heritage, but we can also talk about what it would mean to lift up the heritage of those who didn't start out in the majority culture, who didn't start out with human rights. And as we go through these things, we go through them in the Democratic Party. Everyone used to have a Jefferson Jackson dinner, right?
Yep.
Now they don't. Now they don't. Now they're Kennedy King dinners, or they're Obama dinners, or they just call it the state Democratic Party dinner. So, but that comes with thoughtful conversation of, should we be naming things for people? Should we have more generic spaces that are dedicated to nature? Or maybe should we have some sort of an art contest and then let the public decide that? I think those are all very viable things. But what we shouldn't do is rush to impugn the motives of people who want the removal, or the feelings of those who are uncomfortable with change happening. Change is here. It is going to be uncomfortable, and we have to find space within that discomfort to grow together as a community. That's really, I think, the best way forward.
All right, Christine Pelosi, co-founder of the DNC Veterans and Military Families Council. Thank you so much. Always good talking with you. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a short break on air, but the conversation continues on our live streams, including Facebook Live right now. Be right back. All right. Hey, Facebook friends. Hope you're having a good day. I'm logging in actually just now to check out some of your comments. Got a bit of a late start today. Let's see. Here we go.
2 minutes.
Okay. Let's see. Coming up, we are going to be hearing from a Native American writer and activist who grew up in Oakland. Are you able to, Eric, just put in the... Elliot, okay, thank you. All right. Hi, everybody. See some of my regulars here. Tamara Lee Taylor-Jones, Lockhan Boronia. You have to tell me how to say your name one of these days. Just type it in for me. I'll see it. Lorraine, hello, hello. Lorraine Marie Villarreal, Cora Campbell Brush.
Was that for me?
Good to see you all.
Julian Brave Noise Cat. I had. Okay, great.
I think do we need to say Veronese? I think we do, right? Oh, you did put that in there. Okay, good. That will be fine. Okay, that's fine.
We are back in 30 seconds. We are 15 seconds out. Back in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5 seconds, 4, 3.
Welcome back. There's a lot of conversations going on across the country as companies and cities are replacing racist images like Aunt Jemima and controversial figures like Christopher Columbus. So joining me now to dig deeper into all that is a Native American writer and activist who grew up in Oakland, Julian Noisecat, and also San Francisco civil rights attorney Joe Alioto Veronese. Joe, Julian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, Julian, I'm going to start with you because a few years ago you wrote an article. You were very passionate about this, arguing that monuments to Native American oppression need to come down, and you count Christopher Columbus among them. Explain to me, and for the folks who are wondering what you mean by that, why you felt that was important and why you're happy to see this happen in San Francisco today.
Christopher Columbus was a figure who, for my people and for Native people across the country, represents the genocide that was perpetuated against us on this land, and was a man who does not deserve celebration. We were told, of course, that in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but in fact, just a year or two later, he was enslaving and even raping and encouraging his men to rape women and girls as young as 9 and 10 years old. This is not the kind of historical figure that in the year 2020 in a place like the Bay Area, we should be celebrating. The proper place for a statue of Christopher Columbus, in my view, is in a museum where it can be properly contextualized rather than valorized. And so I'm really excited about the decision made about the Christopher Columbus statue in San Francisco, as well as the statue that will be coming down in the Capitol building in Sacramento.
Mm-hmm. I do wonder if you feel the same way about perhaps President Andrew Jackson, the man responsible for a Trail of Tears, and of course Junipero Serra, Father Serra, that we still see, off of 280, the big finger that points at cars driving by, and there is a statue of him in the rotunda at the Capitol. Do you view all those figures that had a negative impact on Native Americans? Do you think there's a place on display for them in open public spaces, or do you think museum is the way to go?
I think that those statues should be scrutinized and probably taken down in the same way that this Columbus statue was taken down. Throughout the United States South, there is now a very live conversation about monuments to leaders of the United States Confederacy, which obviously separated from our union to wage war to defend the institution of slavery. Similarly, President Andrew Jackson, Junipero Serra, and a number of other figures who advocated for the colonization, assimilation, and genocide against my people, I believe, should not be celebrated and should be, their statues should be taken down. And I think the appropriate way to do this is to implement, commissions that look at and scrutinize many of the public images and monuments and ask whether in a multiracial democracy, these are the kinds of figures whose legacy and deeds we should be celebrating today.
All right, I'd like to bring into the conversation Joe Alietto Veronese, former San Francisco Police Commissioner and San Franciscan as well. On this show, I always welcome and I think encourage, and I think we very much need an open and respectful conversation, different viewpoints. Joe, quite honestly, I don't know exactly where you stand on this, but I'd like to hear, as you break this down, there are many layers and complexities, what you think people should remember when we're talking about the Columbus statue.
That's right, and thank you for the opportunity. Christopher Columbus was not a perfect person, but he was a part of our history here in the United States. And the one thing I would argue with Julian is that I don't think as a piece of art, as a symbol, I don't think statues should be hidden away in museums. I think they should be open to the public. I think that's the whole point of our free speech here in the United States, is that we're able to be out there and to talk freely out in the open about things that occurred in our history. And I appreciate you bringing up Junipero Serra. If you talk about California history, you've got all sorts of good and bad things that had happened. The Franciscans, as they made their way up California, they enslaved the Native Americans as well. So are we going to hide all of that history? The Catholic Church, by way of example, they used slaves all the way up until the 1800s. So are we going to demonize the Catholic Church? No, I think what we need to do is we need to have these structures out in the open so that we can talk about these things. Because while there were some bad things that they did, there were also some very good things that Christopher Columbus did. I don't think it can be argued against the fact that he opened the doors to the Americas for the Europeans. I wouldn't be here today, where I may, but maybe in a different form, if it weren't for Christopher Columbus and some of the extraordinary things that he did. Sure, he did some absolutely bad things, as history has written about them, but why do we need to hide? Why do we need to hide these things away? Are we so frail today that our political leadership is going to take every symbol that has any sort of negative connotation to it and hide it away in a museum so that people can go there to talk about these things? That's where I disagree with this. I think San Franciscans are open to this conversation, and I think that we're adult enough and mature enough to have this conversation out in the public. And the way you see these statues being defaced these days, I'm against that as well. I think some of these statues are pieces of art and they're conversation pieces. And frankly, I'm adult enough to have those conversations. Let's not forget, I come from, I'm an Italian American, but a lot of people forget that Italian Americans were lynched historically as well. We have a history of being discriminated against. Now, maybe it doesn't happen as much in today's world, in our generation, but did it happen years ago? Absolutely it did. So you're going to find moments in time where these things happen. They're a part of our history. Would I be against trying to paint over, by the way, like we did, like was going to be done over at Washington School, where they were going to paint over the mural that had Native Americans and African Americans painted in poor light. No, I was against that because I don't think we should be about revisionist history. That's not what we are as a nation. And we're adult enough, frankly, to have this conversation.
Julian, I'm going to give you a quick 30 seconds, before we take a short break.
So, firstly, I would ask Joe if he could name the original name of San Francisco and the first people of San Francisco. Joe, could you do that?
I know San Francisco as a place named after St. Francis. And to your point,
so San Francisco, to be clear, was originally known as Yelamu by the Ohlone people, who were the first people of San Francisco. In the spirit of truth and history, I think that we have long celebrated. I grew up in California. I remember the 4th grade mission project that I was forced to do alongside other students in my classroom, where we were asked to build little model missions. These are essentially internment camps, remembered as internment camps by California Native people. I was asked to build one and celebrate one in 4th grade. I don't think that there is anybody who's trying to revise history here or hide history here. I think there are people who are trying to have an accurate conversation about history, about the history that is hidden by statues like the statue of Columbus, and that those statues, which celebrate the genocide of the first peoples of this land, do deserve to be recontextualized. They deserve to be put in a place where we can understand actually what the complicated legacy was. And for factual accuracy here, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue on behalf of the Spanish Empire. This is not part of the United States history. So, I think that there is a way in which we can have an honest and accurate conversation about what has happened here, about the fact that, for example, in 1969,
all right,
Alcatraz
Julian,
Island
I'm sorry, I'm
was
going to jump in here. We got to take a short break. We can continue this conversation over on our live stream platform, so join us there.
We're in commercial break.
And again, I'm here with Joe Aliato Veronese and Julian Noiscat. We're discussing the Columbus statue in San Francisco Coit Tower being taken down. It's still to be decided what they'll replace it with. And this is where, I know you two gentlemen have very different perspectives. That's what makes California beautiful, that we can talk about that. But Joe, you also said that it does need to be contextualized, everything. So in what way do you think will be useful, right, when we do have public, whether it's portraits or statues, and when we have a history that's complicated, in which to some it's exploration and manifest destiny, to others it was genocide on their part. How do we bring that all together and learn from it and move forward as Californians, which embodies all these rich diversities and tapestries and ethnicities?
That's a good question, and how we do that is by having conversations in an open forum. When my grandfather was mayor, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, we were the only city in the United States that didn't have a major riot. And one of the reasons why he did that, the reasons why we were able to achieve that, was because he met with the youth organizations, the African American youth organizations, and what he did was he opened up an open mic in the square in front of City Hall, and anybody that could come, that wanted to come and talk about their frustrations, their past, the bad past, the good, the bad, was able to go and do that. And that's why we're great as a nation, is because we can have these conversations. We don't have to hide from them. That's what brings us together, is recognizing our past and having those conversations.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to come back on air in 10 seconds, so hang on.
8, 7, 6, 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, we are back with Native American writer and activist who grew up in Oakland, Julian Noiscat, and San Francisco civil rights attorney Joe Aliato Veronese, continuing our conversation that we were having over on our live stream platforms about the removal today of the Christopher Columbus statue in Coit Tower in that area of San Francisco. So, Julian, sorry we had to cut you off in the middle of your point in the last block. Would you like to finish that about how we can look at history from an educational standpoint?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. So, firstly, I would say that Christopher Columbus obviously is not part of a history of the Bay Area. And I would also say that if we're going to be celebrating things that happened in the Bay Area or celebrating the history of this place, we might more accurately look at things like the 1969 occupation of Alcatraz, effectively the Montgomery bus boycott of the Native American self-determination and rights movement, which happened right here in the Bay Area and was not something that I learned about in high school. It was not something that was on my school curriculum. It happened right here. Mm-hmm. It's an essential starting point for the current era of Native American rights and activism that we're still living through. Mm-hmm. And actually, 2019 was the 50th anniversary of that occupation. So I think that, you know, when we talk about the fullness of history, I don't think that we're short on Christopher Columbus statues in this country. I think that we're short on monuments that honor the history of the diversity of this country.
Now, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but Columbus himself was not particularly tied to this particular region that we now call the Bay Area, right? I mean, he was chosen, that statue, mainly for the fact that we had a robust Italian-American, population here that contributed to the building of this area and vibrancy. So as such, I got to ask you, is there another Italian-American figure, perhaps, that you think everybody can look up to, that perhaps has a less controversial, history that might be a good replacement?
I mean, sure, I can think of a dozen. St. Francis by way of example, but I don't know. I understand what Julian is saying. I don't disagree with him in the sense that terrible things have happened to Native Americans. Should there be a statue that depicts that history, that depicts Native Americans and what happened? Absolutely, I think there should be. Now, I don't know what that would look like, but would you put a statue up that depicts them in a positive light? I mean, these are conversations that need to happen, but it doesn't happen by taking them and putting them someplace else. That's the problem that I'm having here, is that I disagree with Julian in that.
Well, that's factually inaccurate because actually there's going to be a conversation after.
I'll let you finish. Christopher Columbus was a part of.
As a journalist, I think it's important to note that actually there's going to be a conversation, actually because of the removal of the statue, about what will go there in place. So in point of fact, the news of the day is that there is going to be a conversation now about what we put in the place of many of these statues.
Yeah, Joe, if I may ask you, do you feel the same way, Joe, about Confederate symbols, right, which are very hurtful to Black Americans? Do you see those in a different light?
No, I absolutely do. And I think that is different because I think in this, the only way that I would see, it's all about the history, right? So if you are depicting a battle between the North and the South, I think that's the type of thing that we need to see. Now, when we're celebrating Confederacy, I think that's absolutely wrong. But I think that this is a little bit different here, and I think that history teaches us something a little bit different in this statue of Christopher Columbus.
All right, well, this conversation is not ending here today. Obviously, a lot of discussions will be happening in the weeks and months ahead. We don't know what's going to replace that statue, but the Columbus statue in San Francisco did come down today, and I do appreciate both your perspectives. History is seen through two different filters, and we all need to learn to see things from others' filters. Take a short break on air.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right, so gentlemen, I have just a couple minutes, and this is just on Facebook because I'm wrapping up the show when we come back on air. First of all, I just want to say thank you. I know it's not easy, especially in this day and age when people can be quick to judge opinions and experiences that are different from theirs. The fact that you guys had a very open conversation here, I really appreciate that. It helps our viewers a lot. I do want to ask you, though, and that mission project that you mentioned, Julian, is still happening because, okay, so a few years ago when my son was in 4th grade, they had to do that as well. I'm wondering if you two can offer some final thoughts about, like, if you were to do a project like that, I mean, should it just not happen, or should you do it but require reading source materials from Native Americans, right, and looking at it through different lens, which I think you can both agree was not really present in our curriculum?
Yeah.
Julian, why don't you start real quick?
So there's a award-winning book that came out by Benjamin Madley a couple years ago called An American Genocide that looks at the genocide of California Indians that happened right here I think that, we should be talking about what happened, but we shouldn't be celebrating it, which was really honestly how it happened for me in fourth grade. And I think that we should also be making sure that people know the first peoples of the land that they're on, the names of the places that we are in now, and honoring and respecting that. And, obviously that's not what this country has been doing for the vast majority of its history.
All right. Joe, you have 20 seconds to wrap it up.
Yeah, so my son did that project last year, and when he did that project, I actually sat him down and talked to him about the good and the bad that happened. It's historical how the Franciscans made their way up California, finding all of these different cities, and so I took him to some of these sites and told him actually about the slavery that he would have never known about, because that's not what they were teaching. Julian's absolutely right. We should be teaching the bad history that has come as a result of this stuff. I don't know that I glorify.
All right, and on that note, I've got to go back on air. Thank you both so much. Take care. And that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We'll be here every day at 3 o'clock on air and on a live stream answering your questions, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, abc7news.com, and our app. Thank you for this conversation today. World News Tonight is coming up next. Take care. All right, thank you, everybody. And once again, our thanks to Julian and Joe and Christine Pelosi for joining for the conversation spurred on by today's removal of the Christopher Columbus statue in San Francisco. Thank you. Bye, Julian. Take care.
Appreciate it. Thank you.